This meeting is being recorded.
Good afternoon. I can see that people are starting to join. We'll just wait 2 minutes to let everyone enter the meeting. Good afternoon, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more minutes to let people join the meeting. We will just wait till 5 past and then we will start. Okay, we'll just wait 1 more minute and then we'll get started. Okay, 5 past 4 at my time, so we'll make a start. We've got lots of attendees joined, so welcome to the Funders Summit. We're going to be talking about a project that's been run for the International Energy Agency, OES, Ocean Energy Systems Platform, and we're talking about a document called the Evaluation and Guidance Framework. So welcome. I must mention that as you heard as you joined, that the event is going to be recorded so that we can get most benefit from it and perhaps share it with some other funders afterwards. But welcome to the event. This is the document we're talking about. Hopefully you've had a chance to see it. It was published by IEA-OES in January 2021, so just over a year ago. And it has the objective of basically helping funders run effective technology development programs. And we want to get as much adoption, as much uptake of the framework and its recommendations around the world as possible to really maximize the benefit to the ocean energy sector. The main goal of this event is to get as much feedback from funders as possible. So we've planned an hour and a half for the event, and about the first 45 minutes of that will be presentations. But we'd like to get lots of questions after that. So either raise your hand using the Zoom platform or type a question in the comments section, please. I'm going to use a series of surveys using a Mentimeter. So please, could you get hold of your mobile phone is probably the easiest way, and go to menti.com, and then you can type in the number on the screen there and you'll go straight to a series of questions.
Jonathan, I can't see the screen.
Yeah, I think there's a problem. Nobody can see your screen if you're sharing anything.
Okay, hang on. Share again.
That is now working, yeah.
Okay. I'll just go back a slide so you can see this. This is the document that we're talking about this afternoon, and hopefully you've had the chance to see it. As I said, we are going to we're hoping for lots of feedback, so please ask questions after the presentations, either raising your hand or by typing comments. Get hold of your phone and go to menti.com, please. Type in that code 6691658, and you'll be able to access a series of questions that I'll ask throughout the first half of the summit, and then we'll use those to support the discussion in the second half. If it's easier for you, then please do send email feedback directly to me. There's my email address on the screen there. And then I'd really like to follow up with you on more specific questions in one-to-one sessions as required into the future. And what would be even better would be to try and set up a user group. If you can see value in the framework and use it in your national funding programs, then I'd like to be able to contact a user group for feedback and for future improvements as we go forward on this task over the next 3 years. So, in the interests of trying out Mentimeter, everyone's already doing it, right? So what type of funder are you? So series of national funders, international funders, administrators, and some others. So it'd be interesting to know in the comments what type of others we have. But that's a good representation of funders and people involved in administrating them. Right, if you haven't voted on that, please do. I'll carry on with the presentation. That's useful information. So, Funders Summit objectives. Primarily, we want to engage public funders. We want to promote uptake of the framework and gather feedback. We've done, as I'll tell you in a minute, we've done quite a lot of engagement work on this project so far, but it's been quite difficult to access funders themselves. Quite often, we discuss it with technology developers and certification bodies. So this is a really great opportunity to speak to the main customer or the main person that we developed the framework for. As I said, this is an ongoing project under the IEA. I'm coordinating it now, but it was previously coordinated by Matthijs Söder from the European Commission, who you will hear from shortly. And we want to be able to identify and prioritize what improvements we need to make to the framework over the next few years. And as I said, if we can create a working group of willing users, that would really help that process. So I'm really interested to know what challenges funders have experienced during the development of their projects. So can we just take 1 minute and you could type in when you've been running ocean energy funding programs, what challenges have you experienced? What are the biggest challenges you've experienced in running, designing, evaluating, and completing ocean energy funding programs? It's a very open question for this stage. Okay, authorization process, interesting one. Success in general. Okay, just leave that for 30 seconds. Okay, collaboration is a good one. Co-financing. Planning for decommissioning. Great. Oh, that's really useful. Thank you. Please, you can continue to add to that as I carry on. This is the event. This is the agenda we got this afternoon. The first part is going to be some public funders talking about the challenges they've experienced over the past couple of decades, really, of running ocean energy funding programs. So we've got Tim Hurst from Wave Energy Scotland talking about experiences in Scotland, Tim Ramsey from the United States Department of Energy talking about the US experience. Then in response to that, I will give you a short presentation to tell you what's in the framework and how I think it responds to those challenges. And then we're going to have some examples of early adoption. So we've got Matthijs Serder from the European Commission. We're talking about a European Commission perspective. And then Olatz Azuria from Basque Energy Agency, EVE, who've recently used the framework in development of a new program. So that's going to be really interesting to get that evidence of early adoption. I'm going to use the Mentimeter in between presentations to get a bit of more feedback. And then, as I said, lots of time for discussion at the end. Okay, right, we're going to start with our first speaker. It's Tim Hurst from Wave Energy Scotland. And I'll just put your slides up, Tim. Let me know when you want me to move forward.
Okay, thanks, Jonathan. Yeah, just go to the first slide then. Oh, that's the one, yeah. Just to give you a quick background on what Wave Energy Scotland is before we start. We are a public body funded by the Scottish Government. We've been around since 2014. We've been funding technology development in wave energy. We've run 96 projects over that time, 230 organisations involved in the projects, and we put around £41 million of funding into wave energy. 13 countries involved across Europe, and we've run 5 programs. We've run wave energy device programs, but we've also run programs for subsystems, which includes things like power takeoff, control systems, structural materials, and moorings and foundations. So the important thing here is that these programs have been run in stages. They've been assessed with metrics between those stages, and it's been very similar to the Task 12 framework in terms of the structure of the program. Prior to 2014, the Scottish Government also, through its enterprise agencies, funded wave energy projects through a grant structure that was not as successful, and we had a number of projects that really didn't really develop new technology. We had failures of companies. So the previous program wasn't successful. So I've got a chance here to compare the two, one that's like Task 12 and one that isn't. So what I'm just going to go through is some of my thoughts on what the technical risks, what the risks and issues are with funding a standard grant-funded program, and how they are improved by a Task 12 framework kind of program. So Jonathan, if you go to the next slide. So some of the issues that we faced with our previous program, and one of the things that gave us problems was that we found it very difficult to get visibility of the risks carried by the technology developers themselves. Tech companies tended to underestimate the scale of the technical risks. I think that's fair to say, and generally felt more confident about the way that they could fix things than was real, which resulted in technical risks being carried right through the program towards the end of the program and then being realized. And I think with small technology companies with limited breadth of experience, there are risks that they know about, and there are also risks that they don't know about. And if they're not exposed early, it can be expensive at the end of the program. And contractually, most companies would say, well, that's our risk, but as a funder, reputationally, it's our risk. So it's really important that we understand what the risks are. If you go to the next bullet, Jonathan. We also find it quite difficult to assess the technology progress. Each developer tended to want to use their own metrics that best suited their technology and showed them in the best light. We generally had a lack of independent verification of performance, so it was quite difficult to compare technologies. And at that stage, everyone had a different opinion of what represents good. So what a technology developer thought was good, we didn't necessarily think was good. So those were the sort of issues with assessing the technology. If you go to the last one. And I think it's also quite difficult to define clearly what are the technology requirements. What is it you're trying to support? It's very easy to have a program that has a wide remit to develop wave energy technology, for instance, but actually, once you've started a program, you want to be more specific there. You want to actually focus in on what the market needs and specify it quite clearly. And as I said, if you don't get a handle on assessment, if you don't get a handle on risk, what happens is that when technology companies fail, they do it at the end of the project, when the impact is the most, the reputational risk is the highest, and the costs are highest. And the final thing that I wanted to cover was about collaboration. One of the things that we experienced was when we funded in this way, technology companies wanted to do everything in-house. They wanted to keep everything to themselves. And that did not really encourage collaboration with the supply chain or with competing technology companies. Okay, let's move to the slide that looks at the advantages of having a framework and how some of those issues are alleviated. So by breaking a program into discrete stages of development, that allows us to look at the technology early on in the development process and find flaws in the technology at an early stage. That means that you spend smaller amounts of money to find out where the risks are and to establish where the better technology is, and you can focus funding on the stronger technologies. That lowers the financial risk, lowers the reputational risks, and when there are a number of milestones to meet, generally contractors are more motivated to meet those targets. Let's go to the next bullet point, Jonathan. If you add to that then stage gate metrics, that makes the whole concept of clearly defining your requirements much easier, because you have a number of requirements each stage gate. It allows regular assessment of technical progress so that we can expose those technical risks early. And importantly, it allows comparison between different technologies on a like-for-like basis, which in our case allowed a competitive program to be run. So from a OES point of view, I think the introduction of metrics combined with a staged process really helped us to alleviate the majority of the problems that we were experiencing in our previous program. And I think one of the things that really does support that is the fact that we have run 96 projects in that 4-year period, and out of 96 projects, we've only had one project that didn't complete, which is a phenomenal record compared to the previous program of technology development. Okay, I think that's everything that I wanted to cover. So I'll pass back to you, Jonathan.
Brilliant. Thank you, Tim. We'll focus on visibility of risks and the ability to set clear requirements and get collaboration happening in competitive projects. Thanks very much. I'll now pass on to Tim Ramsey in the States, who's going to talk to us about the water power program and the challenges experienced there. Thanks, Tim.
Yep, thanks, Jonathan. And that was great to hear your presentation as well, Tim. I don't know if it's comforting or not, but we have seen all those challenges, all those hurdles that you mentioned. We've seen the exact same thing over here in the U.S., and they all definitely really resonated with me. So yeah, this work is incredibly important.
Yep.
Can you go to the next slide, Jonathan? So I'll start with just a quick introduction into our office, our program. So our office, the Water Power Technologies Office, we sit within the U.S. Department of Energy. And at the U.S. Department of Energy, they bucket the programs, the offices around technology resource type. So there's a wind office, a biomass office, a solar office, and our office is one of those renewables, the water office. And so our office is broken into 2 main programs, the hydropower program, which includes pump storage systems, and then the marine energy program. And that's the program that I work on, that I run, is the marine energy program. And for us here in the U.S., Congress defines marine energy as energy from waves, from currents, including ocean currents, river currents, tidal currents, OTEC, as well as pressure and salinity gradients. And so Congress every year gives us a budget, and then those are taxpayer public dollars, and we have to use those funds to the best of our ability to support marine energy technologies with the overall mission of moving technologies and moving the industry towards commercialization. So just for context, our funding has kind of fluctuated over the years a bit, but the last 2-3 years, it's been pretty steady at about $110 million a year for the marine energy program. So that's what we have, the resource that we have at our disposal as far as funding to support those projects. Next slide. So with that in mind, with that mission in mind, we have a number of activities that we support and tackle in support of that mission. Foundational R&D, we're doing a lot of base foundational research around materials and controls and modeling, resource assessments, things like that. We also support our technology developers, our pipeline of solvers, to actually build systems, build components, and test them and see what works. As far as testing, we need to provide testing. So we do have funding. Part of our funding goes towards test infrastructure and economical access to that test infrastructure. But ultimately, we do need to get in the water. We fund in-water demonstrations once we get far enough up the technology readiness level, because you need to get in the water. You need to get into a relevant environment to truly understand how these systems perform and operate. Kind of hand in hand with that, anytime we're going in the water, we're always trying to gather as much environmental data as we can. So we have projects and we support the development of hardware and software around environmental monitoring technologies, as well as the gathering of data themselves. And we do that mainly because we're trying to address barriers in the regulatory process. We know it's very time consuming, very expensive to get through the permitting process, and we're trying to tackle that hurdle through science and through data. And of course, we're always partnering with our local community, engaging with our stakeholders, and always trying to meet the end users' needs and solve their needs to the best of our ability. Next slide. To execute on those activities on our mission, we have a number of different funding mechanisms at our disposal, tools in the toolbox. Our most common one is our funding opportunity announcement. So we put out funding for competition that the public can apply for, but that's not the only one. We do work at our national labs, we run prizes, we do work in SBIR, which is the Small Business Innovative Research Office. We work with other federal agencies, quite a bit with Navy and with NOAA, trying to leverage each other's funding and leverage each other's work, especially over common mission and interest space. And we do cooperative agreements as well. And with each of these different mechanisms, there's different requirements, there's different risks, and there's different needs. And we try to purposely build them and right fit them for the activities that we're supporting, for the objectives that we're trying to solicit. So we first figure out what's the work that we're trying to do, and then we try to match that up with the most appropriate funding mechanism. And as you can imagine, as you move further towards the right, towards commercialization, the risk goes up, the project size, the funding goes up, and the need for rigor through metrics and standards certainly becomes more critical. Next slide. So just a little quick history on kind of our program and our use of rigor and metrics and standards throughout the years. So we were first stood up in 2007, the Marine Energy Program, which relatively speaking, compared to other renewables and other programs within the US DOE, we're still a very new program, an emerging program, and that's a reflection of the industry. We're still a new emerging industry as well. So back in the early days, we ran our first funding opportunity in 2008, and 2008, 2009, we really had very little, if any, metrics at all. We basically had open topic areas, said, submit us your good ideas, we'll review those, and we'll just pick projects that we think are have the best likelihood of success. In 2010, we probably took our first big step in adding in rigor. We developed or started implementing TRLs, technology readiness levels, and we bucket them in kind of three big buckets of technology readiness levels, and we set up our funding opportunities around those buckets. But one of the challenges we saw immediately is the way we set it up was that the developers, the applicants, could self-identify. So they could tell us they had to justify it, but basically we took them at their word of what their technology readiness level was. And as you moved up the TRL scale, the projects got bigger and the funding available increased. So as you can imagine, developers were always coming in and probably overstating their TRL because they wanted to get the maximum funding possible. From there, in the next few years, and ran some additional funding opportunities, 2013, 14, where we tried to bring in more metrics. We were using LCOE, but we picked a few other metrics like power to weight ratio and peak to average power, metrics that we thought were good proxies for performance, good proxies for success, but they weren't backed with a standard way of calculating and really applying those metrics. So we saw that there was still gaps that we couldn't adequately compare between projects and adequately assess performance, because again, it left a lot to the user's input. So when OES Task 12 and the metric task started, we jumped at that opportunity to get involved because we knew we had this need in the program. We knew we had this challenge. We were kind of doing the best we can to address it, but we knew we needed more rigor and in particular, a more standardized, comparable approach. So again, yes, we jumped at it. And if you go to the next slide, we've been applying that work over the last few years as we've been working with the OES Task 12, and that's probably evidenced best by the latest funding opportunity that we ran in fiscal year 21, which actually we just made announcements yesterday on this funding opportunity, a total of 8 projects for $25 million. But in this funding opportunity, if you've seen it or if you want to take a look, we really embedded our use of metrics, the work coming out of OES Task 12, our work on standards really from the beginning of the funding opportunity, and it will continue through the end of the project management. So in the funding opportunity, We had the metrics that the applicants had to follow, the process for them to apply it, the calculations that they had to use in a very standardized way, so that when we put out the funding opportunity, that it could be based on this rigor, on the standardized approach to the metrics. But then when we received the applications, we reviewed them against that, and that helped in our review process. And I think the projects ultimately that were selected do have the best likelihood of success based on that justification. Right now, we're going to be negotiating with these awards, building in those metrics, additional metrics into their statement of project objectives. And then throughout the life of the award, we'll be holding them to that standard and applying those as they go. And there's stage gates and go, no goes set up in the awards every few years, and we'll be assessing them at those go, no go reviews. And if they are not performing, they will not pass. So that's another way that we're applying those metrics. And I think you can hit the next button. I think there's another little thing here. Yes, thanks. And really why we're doing this is yes, we want to see success. We aim to measure success, and we know success breeds further success. We're trying to reduce risk. We know that reducing risk reduces costs, and we want to see more private investment coming into the industry. We want to see better rates for the industry, a better rate of return, and that all is around and is embedded in the OES task world in this risk framework, which is why we, again, we're happy to pick it up, and we will continue to use this. And you can go to the next slide. And I'll leave you with that. And I would say that we're still growing. And I like this quote here. Elaine turned me on to this quote. But the measure of success is not whether you have a tough problem to deal with, but whether it's the same problem you had last year. And that's true here. We're still learning. We're still growing. We're still figuring out better ways to apply the work that we've done in metrics and standards. And we'll use this latest funding opportunity also as another learning opportunity, and we'll continue to, I believe, get better and better and better each year. So thank you for your time, and pass it back to you, Jonathan.
That's great. Thank you very much, Tim. That's really interesting. I'm going to put up another Mentimeter, but while I do that, just a quick thought, Tim. That will be on the screen now. I would just like to sort of focus on some of the risks that I heard then in those two presentations, and ask you to give us an idea of which ones of those you have found to be a problem and how much, and which ones of them you've never found to be a problem, and whether you've got some other risks that you'd like to mention we can discuss later. But Tim, we'll go into this in a minute. One of the things that was in the scope for this current document is that it's focused on utility scale generation of electricity. And I know that you recently have run a funding program about desalination as well. Did you find value in a different application as well, or do you think much improvement or adjustment of the document would be required to apply it to different objectives like that?
That's a really good question. I assume that was for me, right?
Yes, please.
Yeah, short answer is there's certainly enough good work that's been done to date that we can use what's been done, and it may look a little different when we're applying the metrics or the standards to some of what we call our PBE work, powering the blue economy, so our non-grid applications, which includes desal as well as a number of others. So it probably looks a little different than the metrics that we would pick or how we would apply them to the grid scale. Maybe in the future, similar to what I was saying at the end, we can always get better. We can always learn more, have a more rigor, better metrics to apply. So I could see value in thinking through that, whether it's new metrics or just new standards or protocol for assessing them. I'm sure that would be useful, but in the meantime, I think there's enough within the document, within the framework that we can still apply it and get value, get what we need. Cool. That's my opinion, useful. But if other panelists have opinions, or I don't know if we have time, but happy to hear what other people have to say.
Yeah, if other panelists have got a comment on that, would be useful. It's just something that I thought of at this stage. Mm-hmm. we focused on one application, but we tried to make it as useful as possible for other applications. Okay, right, this is interesting. I was expecting a focus on the first one, but clearly getting data out of projects, ensuring the right activities are carried out, and this issue of risk are big issues for more than just the panelists. So that's really interesting. Thank you. Okay, next item in the agenda is me. I'm going to give you. I'm just going to give you an introduction to what the framework is. So, as I said, this is the document we're talking about. I want to talk about the objectives of the framework. Where has it come from? What does it include? And how will it benefit the funders? And hopefully we'll see some response to some of the challenges we've just heard and some of the challenges that you've also experienced. So what are the objectives? As I said on the first slide right at the beginning of the session, it was all about trying to help funders carry out more efficient, more effective funding programs to be able to support investment decision making, to point technology funding at the most promising technologies, guide appropriate and robust activities in those projects, and in doing all this, share knowledge and promote collaboration and build international consensus, because if we can all agree on the contents of this framework and the way we fund ocean energy, then I think the benefits are magnified, because technologies can more easily move between funding programs, and we can collaborate to avoid repeating funding. So the benefits it brings, I think it's mainly about clarity of stakeholder expectations. People can see what is expected of them, and funders can more easily provide a clear expectation. Efficient decision-making processes, as I say, to try and get the funding that's available to the best technologies, those with the highest chances of commercial success, and having a consistent technology development process across the world to promote international collaboration, as Tim Hurst mentioned, and to have the idea of globally transferable technologies. And that's something that I think a lot of funders have experienced, technology developers moving from a funding scheme in one country to a funding scheme in a different country, and wanting to have clarity of what has been done in the earlier stages of development, and understand what readiness that technology has for your own funding program. So that idea of globally transferable technology. So where has it come from? This has been a piece of work that started perhaps even before 2016, but this is when it sort of started in a formal way under this task. We've run a series of workshops starting back in 2016 alongside the International Conference on Ocean Energy. And there we started to look at what are the fundamental requirements for development of an ocean energy technology? What does it need to satisfy? And once we'd got input from a wide range of stakeholders on that, including technology developers, consultants, public and private investors, and also test centers and certification bodies, we started to move through to add detail to that, to add understanding of what is expected in a program and how you measure success. We presented it publicly in a number of webinars, and then carried out a series of peer reviews across the sector to try and build detail and get consensus on the contents before we published the document in 2021. It's been delivered by a working group, which includes Wave Energy Scotland, the University of Edinburgh, Department of Energy in the USA, and some national labs in the States, and also Technalia in Spain. And as I said, up till recently, it was led by Matthijs from the European Commission. We carried out a lot of publicity in 2021 around ocean energy conferences and specific webinars, but we found it quite difficult to engage directly with very many public funders. Quite often the conversation has been with technology developers and public and certification bodies. And I'll talk later about how I think this framework is valuable for them as well, but the primary customer was public funders, so it's really great to be able to speak directly to you. So what does the framework include? It contains 4 key components, and you've heard about this part already. It splits the technology development process into 6 stages, and this aligns with the IEC, technology development process, but adds on a stage 0, which is when the very, very early stage technology development occurs. And we did that because that's a part where public funding is quite prevalent, whereas moving towards the later stages, you can start to move into private investment as well. We wanted to make sure that we covered the appropriate tasks to get good technologies into the beginning of the process. So it goes all the way from concept creation to commercial scale array demonstration. Across all of those stages, we developed a set of evaluation areas, and that's been built right from that first workshop I mentioned, where we were looking at the fundamental requirements of technology development. And these evaluation areas cover the key areas that you need to demonstrate success in to deliver a promising technology. So all the way from the main one, affordability, and then through the concepts of power capture, power conversion, things like reliability, survivability, a key one in this sector, and then some of the operational and supply chain based evaluation areas. So that enables us to give clarity on what are the things that you need to deliver success in. For each one of those evaluation areas, we've defined a set of evaluation criteria. And those are effectively metrics, but we chose language there to appeal internationally. Evaluation criteria, that's the specific parameter, perhaps engineering parameter, that you need to use to measure success against that evaluation area. So an example there, looking at survivability, the range of acceptable environmental conditions. For reliability, the mean time to repair. So this, we found, gives a real clarity to what we mean by the evaluation areas. Each of these evaluation areas has a clear definition in the document. And even that simple step, I think, has been quite impactful in the sector, to be able to have clarity on what do we mean when we talk about survivability? What does controllability mean for the developer of a power takeoff system compared to a wave energy converter device, type of thing. So that's an important piece of clarity. And then for each stage and for each evaluation area, we have a set of stage activities. So going through stage 0, 1, 2, 3, you define exactly what is expected to be delivered by a project. So how do I think this can benefit funders? I think we'll hear about examples of this in a second, but I think it gives you a tool for developing a funding program to be able to select activities to suit the entry and exit stage that you want to influence with your funding program and the budget that you have. I think this might be particularly important when funders have a really broad portfolio, not focused on wave energy or tidal energy, and need that assistance of what technologies development requires. And in doing that, in releasing those funding calls or funding programs, it really helps to be able to provide clear expectations to the applicants, so that you can know what technology background is expected of the applicants to be ready for a stage, what data and outcomes they're expected to provide, and what areas of technology attractiveness, those evaluation areas, they would need to be able to demonstrate. And it helps them to choose their technology as well as their application. It helps funders to be able to evaluate and compare technologies effectively using a consistent data set, using the data that they're expecting, and they know how to use. And as both Tim Hurst and Tim Ramsey mentioned, it helps you to be able to monitor progress, monitor risks, and understand the impacts of those risks. So that's a brief demonstration of what's in the framework. Hopefully you'll be able to take the time to look at the document itself, and if you haven't already, and let me know of any questions. But I just wanted to explain the objectives of the framework, where the frameworks come from, what it includes, and how we think it will benefit funders. But that's a key part of the discussion that we want to have next. Okay, before we move on to Matthijs, I'm going to do another Menti here. So just from what you can see from the framework so far, and perhaps what you've seen if you've been able to spend some time reading it, Can you see whether it will help you now, whether you can identify some further improvements that if implemented, then it will help you? Or can you see that it won't help you because it doesn't respond to the challenges that you have in your funding programs? And you can be honest, because I'm really interested to know what those further improvements might be. Okay, that's good. That's a good start. We can talk about those improvements. It's kind of nobody to say option C. Thank you. Right. Thank you very much for that. Right, I'll move on to our next speaker, who is Matthijs Serder from the European Commission, and he's going to talk to us about examples of early adoption. Matthijs.
Hi, Jonathan. Thanks for inviting me. You're doing a great job. Yeah, you had put a kind of request to me, and it really gives me a bit of a headache, because as an early adoption, how can we use? I know I've been involved in this task as well, and I really have been promoting this for a long time. It's also based on the experiences which Tim Hurst already presented before. I'm really jealous what is happening in the DOE, also the adoption of this stage gate metrics. But in the European Commission, we have a funding scheme which is much more generic. We don't have a specific ocean energy or a wave energy program. And then it is much more easier to adopt this framework, while we have to comply with the general rules. And I think that is, for some of the funders, really a problem. And we still try within the frame which we have. And a clear example is maybe the next slide, is we have general work programs, and that we make a kind of reference to that the developers which are going to make use of our funding programs bring in the experiences of from national funding schemes, but they try to follow these guidelines. And for that reason, we also say, hey, like, please justify the cost estimation following a recognized calculation methodology. And in fact, we are referring them as well to this framework, which we have been presenting, and that the same calculation methods are used. Key performance indicated based on international recognized metrics, that people are aware of how it is formulated. And look, it's not just about simple stage gate metrics. There's about each key performance indicators, some knowledge behind, and very well explained, I think, in the document how it works. And that came to a kind of a very easy example, and that's the next slide. It was at a certain point somebody asking as well, hey, what does it mean performance? What does it mean reliability? And normally there is no consensus on that. There's always, oh, you can see it like that and that. And then it was very clear, hey, I can refer to this reference document where there has been some study and international accepted terminology. And I said, okay, performance. Okay, performance is very difficult because there are many different parameters included, and that's clearly defined with all the different evaluation areas. But for reliability, it's really a clearly defined definition. So I could refer, and it's also that, and this question was coming from information contact point, also kind of consultant, so that he could apply it for the project which he was going to develop. So I think that's very useful already as a very first step, that you can try to refer on the standardization on the document in your funding schemes. Maybe the next slide, it's a bit about the TRLs and the stages, because in the stage gate matrix, we've clearly defined the difference from 0 to 5. You presented already before, but in the general framework which we have with our European funding program, I have to stick to TRL 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. People love that as well. But sometimes it is, where's the match? And when do you go from each TRLs? But we ask as well in our program, bring the technology up to TRL 3 or up to TRL 5. So in fact, to the next stage. So in a way, by the formulation in our calls, there is a kind of comparison. We are calling for research actions and demonstration actions, which are going up to TRL 7 in general, up to stage 4. And when developers now bring in as well proof that they have been already at TRL 4 or 5, which they have to do, could be as well that they have been doing national funding schemes or national metrics. That I have a kind of a proof of stage 3, and I would like now for the demonstration actions in our program. It's not easy, but you really have to formulate as well the calls which we are doing in that respect. For the next slide, what we think that it will be an expected benefit is the quality of the applications will improve. When we all apply it in a certain way, the developers are also more clear in defining TRLs. You had the Mentimeter. Do you have difficulties with the TRL entry? Yes, sometimes we have, because when we ask for a demonstration projects, developers pretend sometimes that they are already at a certain stage. So good assessment before, that's so helpful, I think, on the credibility of project proposals. Alignment of expectations, I think that's also clear, that we have the same definition, that we know what is reliability, what is operationability, or what is maintainability, the different evaluation areas. And at a certain point, data will be available and there will be some more evidence of outcomes. And that's what we expect here. But it's very hard to adopt it into an existing framework. But there are some possibilities, and I would like to join as well the discussion a bit, because there is a kind of solution as well, maybe to how to solve it, and I would like to mention already Europe Wave. Remind me to come back on that later. Just a first shot.
That's great. Thanks very much, Matthijs. I was going to come back with a couple of comments on TRLs and definitions then, but let's save that for the discussion section. I think it's an interesting conversation. Okay, now we're going to move on to Alats from EVE, the Basque Energy Agency, to talk about their programs. That's taking a time. Okay, can you see your slides, Alats?
Yes, perfect. Thank you very much. Okay, so yeah, my name is Olatz Ajuria and I work for the Basque Energy Agency. If you go to the next slide, please. I will start my presentation just briefly introducing the EVE and the Basque Energy Agency, and to show you why we are involved in this ocean energy world. Then I will explain our experience in funding ocean energies. And to conclude, I will let you know our first and unique experience so far using the framework for ocean energy technology. So in the next slide, okay, EVE, as I told you, is the energy agency of the Basque government, and we have to propose, and into our duties is to propose the energy strategies for the Basque country, and we also participate in developing those strategies and trying to reach the targets that are set in there. And we do that the way most of the energy agencies do. But in addition, I would like to highlight that we also promote singular projects. We participate in public-private partnerships, and we try to create also market opportunities. So next slide, please. In our current energy strategy in the Basque country, we have some specific objectives for marine renewables, as you can see in the table in the middle of your screen. You can see that it shows 60 megawatts for the year 2030. That is a split 10 megawatts for ocean energies and 50 megawatts for offshore wind. But it is true that for 10 megawatts for ocean energies, mainly it is wave energy because this is the resource we have in our costs. Next slide, please. Okay, so in the past, from EBE, we have promoted demonstration projects such as Motrico Wave Power Plant, which nowadays, in addition to the demonstration project, is also a testing facility for air turbines and other components and subsystems that can be tested in that plant. And then we have the Armincha site of WIMEP, which is an offshore infrastructure connected to the grid to test marine renewable energy converters. So next slide, please. So in the Basque Country, as I mentioned, we have specific objectives for the wave energy sector, and we have also testing infrastructures. But this is not enough to motivate the sector and to invest in technology development. So we also put in place some funding mechanisms. We have quite a long experience with a grant program. So every year we publish a grant program for investments in the demonstration and validation of emerging marine renewable energy technologies. And this grant program is based on eligibility. The grants we are awarding with this grant program is based on the eligibility of the costs presented by the developers, which are generally those costs associated to the testing of the devices in a real environment, such as like the test site fee, the towing of the devices, the installation costs, the insurances, even the moving system of the devices. But it is true that to access that grant, and until now, we ask the developer to demonstrate the previous works and developments to which the enough technology readiness level to test their devices in the offshore environment, and that was all. So we carry out that qualitative assessment, but we don't measure any metrics or anything. So our later experience is launching a pre-commercial procurement in which the Ocean Tech company, which nowadays is IDOM, was awarded to design, fabricate, install, and test their wave energy converter. And the last experience is with the PCP is the Europe Wave project. This project that started in early 2021, so a year ago. And we are participating in that project with the colleagues from WES, Wave Energy Scotland and Ocean Energy Europe, and it is funded by the European Commission. And for us, this is like the first time using the OES framework to evaluate technology development. So for a funding agency like us, like ours, which want to promote and develop ocean energy technologies, but it is not our sole activity, like for example, WES. Just to start, it is of great help to have a framework which is developed and accepted internationally. So it's like the basis for us. And on one hand, this framework identifies the path that the technology needs to follow in its development. And this is useful for funding agencies like ours. So in the way that we can clearly identify where we think or where we are interested in to invest money or to design and launch funding programs in the whole development. And on the other hand, it gives a tool to better assess the entry and or the output stages of the technology from our funding programs, the funding programs that we are putting in place, which is a little bit less generic than the descriptions of the TRLs. So it is the framework. I think it is useful in this sense because it is a little bit more specific. And in general, I would say that in competitive funding programs such as Europe Wave, funding agencies, we are responsible for describing this evaluation process of the technology. And I think it is crucial to have specific metrics, not only for the developers and future investors, but also for the public entities, to have an ambiguous and as objective as possible metrics and processes to evaluate the technology. Because this will for the funding agencies, this is a tool to give the certainty of doing the most efficient use of available resources and maximizing the outputs. But it is true, maybe if we go to the next slide, please, and maybe to the next slide. So it is true that in the practical use of the framework, for example, in Europe-Wave, we found some constraints, as always. Nothing is perfect. And in Europe-Wave, we had a certain amount of, we had a budget and some time to develop the works. So at some point, we had to choose some of the evaluation areas and prioritize some of them to develop under the program. So the technology developers, they know they have to go through all those evaluation areas and progress in all of them. But us as funding agencies, and with this program, we had to select some of those evaluation areas and to assess the technical quality of the projects. So that was a challenge for us, I think. Maybe the people from West can also comment on that, but something that we had to do in this project. So I think this was all from my side. We can maybe discuss furthermore in the discussion period. Thanks.
That's great. Thank you very much for that. So it's good to hear about the application of the program of the framework and how it helped you with that first release of the Europe-Wave project. Thank you. Right, now that's all of our presentations done. So now it would be really good to engage the audience a bit more. First of all, I'll just open for questions. If you would like to ask a question, you can either type it into the chat box or you can raise your hand, I believe, and then Janet from WaveEc can let you speak. Is there anyone who has a question straight off? I can't see any questions yet. Oh, there's one. Pablo.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. This is Pablo Ruiz-Minguela from Tecnalia, and it is to follow on some previous mention about the TRLs and stages that has been presented. I think you have touched on these, and also Matthijs has mentioned that the European Commission is more focused on TRLs than the stages, and that the funding calls or opportunities will move the technologies from one stage to another. So the question here is, what would be the benefit of focusing on the stages in comparison with the more established TRL?
Thanks, Pablo. I think that question kind of responds to a few things that came up in the presentation there. The fact that people are used to using TRLs, the fact that I think Tim Ramsey said people were able to self-select their TRL in the very early stages, and that brought some problems for people trying to get into the higher stages of funding when they're not technologically prepared or ready for it. And also a question that we've had a lot in the last year is how does this framework align with the recommendations of the IEC, or the International Electrotechnical Committee, if you're not aware of it, who are the main standards developer, who use TRLs extensively. And the answer to that last bit is that it doesn't conflict with the IEC standards, it simply adds to it. It adds clarity, as I've said a number of times, rather than just saying this is the TRL we're expected to get to. It shows you what that means. What activities do you need to deliver in order to to achieve that TRL, and also importantly, what activities should you have done previously to be ready for that stage of development. So I think the importance is clarity and extra information of expectation. And I think you mentioned the movement of technologies between countries then. Again, if a technology says we're at TRL 5, then it can try to move from one country's funding scheme to another, and the receiving country doesn't have that much information about their readiness. Whereas if you've got evidence of them going through a series of stages, you can kind of understand the pedigree of that technology and where it's come from. So it can help people, both help funders, but also help technology developers to move from one country to the other. As if you say I'm TRL 7, it's very easy to say that you're TRL 7, but it's very difficult to prove that you have effectively achieved TRL 7. And the stages and the metrics and the evaluation areas give you the framework within which to present that data. So that helps both funders and technology developers.
Thank you, Jonathan.
Thanks, Pablo. I wonder if I'll just go to some of these Mentimeter questions. I was really interested.
I actually had my hand up there.
Oh, sorry, Henry.
Jonathan, thanks very much for that presentation, and to the other speakers for their overview. And it was good to see in the Mentimeters that there was a high degree of saying, okay, that it's something that we could use right now. And it's a question for Matthijs really, and then maybe to the other participants on the call. It seems, Matthijs, that you've been able to add this into your Horizon Europe programme quite straight, or sort of implement it into your Horizon Europe programme quite straightforwardly by just adding those couple of sentences, by saying, that we're asking participants to make sure that they align themselves with a recognised international metrics. I'm wondering, Matthijs, if that was something that was easy to include in your call, or if you had to have sort of debate with sort of the rest of the programme in order to put that language in there. So maybe, Matthijs, to sort of begin with, and then I'm interested, sort of maybe from the Tims or to hear sort of how easy that would be to implement into other programmes, that sort of straightforward language.
Thank you, Henry. It was not too complicated, to be honest. So because this is very specific for the ocean energy, as you know, it is an open program. It is not a top-down or a bottom-up program. It's more top-down with the prescription for the certain areas. But the framework on the TRLs and how much funding and the whole evaluation process, etc., that you can't touch in that respect. But the top-down description of what we would like to see in wave energy or tidal energy, that's indeed for the sector, and others are not touching it that much. But it should be clear language. And that's something where we have to improve. And that's my experience. By the way, I solicited already for saying a bit more in the discussion, and in fact, Olas went already into it says Europe Wave. And in fact, when you have a very bottom-up program, or you can't use these metrics in your own national funding scheme, at a certain point, you might try to create to externalize it in a way. And I was in contact with Tim Hurst from Wave Energy Scotland, I think already 5-6 years ago, and he explained me the benefits of the way of working of Wave Energy Scotland at the time, and really liked that in such a way. So he said, okay, let's try to set something up like that in Europe. And we have been setting up this Europe Wave initiatives, and it might be that national governments would like to join such an European activity as well in a new stage in that respect, based on the experiences now, and that it's going in that way, and that national funding schemes are joining forces in that respect. Unfortunately, it was only Scotland and Spain who could jump in now, but there was interest of the Irish. But if maybe the French or the Danish or other pros are interested, it might be interesting to give that a follow-up. But you have to be creative sometimes, as even as a funding body. That's
Thanks, Matthijs. It certainly seems a very practical way of getting the benefits from the IE framework, just by adding some language in your call text, asking them to align with an international framework.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you both. That's really good to hear, because one of the objectives, I guess, was to present useful information to funders who perhaps don't want to get involved in the level of detail that's provided in IEC standards, to provide something more accessible. And the fact that accessible information is quite easy to implement in a funding program is promising to make it useful to people. Thank you.
Yeah. I was going to just add to that really quick, Jonathan. Just answer your question directly, Henry. Yes, we found it easy to add into our funding calls internally. No pushback from management. In fact, they welcomed it. But on the flip side, I've also heard from our developers, our applicants, that they appreciate that as well. They want to know what they're going to be reviewed against. They want to know what they need to show to be successful. When there's too much ambiguity, they get anxiety over that. They would prefer very, I guess, strict rules, for lack of a better term. But the more clear we can be on what they're being reviewed against, the more beneficial it is to them as well.
And thanks, Tim. And do you think that, in the upcoming programs where you're introducing that, will you then sort of give that as guidance to your merit reviewers, that making the merit reviewers make use of this IE document?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a likely approach. Yes.
Thanks.
Tim Hurst got his hand up. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, sorry, can I just add to that? Tim hinted there that developers liked the framework as well, and I think one of the problems that we had, and I didn't mention earlier on, is that where technology developers move from different programs and they have very different objectives, you end up with a technology development that doesn't go in a straight line. It moves around to where the funding is, and it's not optimum. But if we all align to agreed standards in a framework like this, then a developer can jump between funding programs, even nationally, but they're generally heading in a straight line towards the ultimate goal of getting a competitive wave energy device. So I think it is a big advantage to the developers as well, because also they get to know what the standards are. They know what they're dealing with. Every time you have a new program with a new set of requirements, everybody has to learn what the requirements are and try and understand it before they can put a bid in. So bidding becomes easier, and we've all got a clearer view of where we're going.
Thanks, Tim. Matthijs, did you want to carry on from that?
Yeah, from the perspective of developers, it's even to the next stages, in fact, from stage 5 as well, because at a certain point you would like to private investors, banks, whatever, insurance companies as well, to ramp up the technology to bring it up to the market. And what you see as well is that some of the banks would like to do due diligence on technologies, and it gives already the developers in a very early stage guidance to what are critical criteria, what is important. It's not just about delivering power, but it's so many different aspects in the development of the technology. And I think what might be also very good is that when national fundings are supporting companies, that is, have a look to the project. Hey, have a look to this guide, because how is the maintainability? How is that? How is that? How is that? Because at a certain point, when you would like to get money out of the free market from the banks or whatever, this is very useful. That might be as well a bit of a push from the funding agencies to the developers as such. I hope you could follow me.
Yeah, that's good to hear. That's good discussion. Thank you. I'm going to jump to a question that's come in through the chat. And the question is, do you recommend the use of the TPL assessment, which is an assessment methodology that's been developed by National Renewable Energy Lab in the States? And I think that's a really interesting question, because I think that helps to explain the scope of what this framework is intended to do. The TPL framework is a way of evaluating primarily early stage, but all wave energy technologies. And there's a clear alignment with the type of evaluation areas that are considered in the TPL framework with the IEA-OES framework. But I think the really interesting part of the boundary of our scope with this document is that the OES framework gives an explanation of what evaluation should be done, what data should be provided, and what activities should be carried out in a technology development program. It doesn't specify how that should be evaluated. And I think the TPL is a really good example of how you choose to evaluate those technologies, how you choose to evaluate the evaluation areas of reliability, performance, survivability, all those things. Another example of how you evaluate is the IEC standards. So that's the kind of interface of what this document provides compared to what exists already in the sector. So the things work together quite nicely. Hopefully that's an answer to your question there, and an explanation of how well we think this framework interacts with the other evaluation processes going on in the sector. And Tim Ramsey right at the beginning mentioned that they use some metrics and they've added additional metrics for specific questions in specific funding programs. And that's important to know, that what we specify in the OES framework is not exclusive of adding other evaluation criteria, other metrics in, and those should fit alongside the sort of core framework of data that a funder should be able to expect and be able to use for their evaluations. So that's just a bit of interface. What I want to do now, I got quite a good feeling from this slide that the majority of people think that the list of challenges there was similar to the ones they experienced. On the next one, we had this. So it will help a lot of people now. It will help some people through further improvements. And we had another question on the chat which says, how can people engage to tell us what those improvements are? And it'd be really nice to talk about it now. But just to add to that, I said that I would send a follow-up email to people after this session. I'd be really happy to hear from you, to have a direct one-to-one discussion about the framework and how it can be useful, to hear about what improvement needs you have. But this could be a nice part of a nice way to finish off the discussion today. Has anybody who clicked on the pink one there, has anyone got any suggestions of what you think needs to be added to the framework, what needs to be changed on the framework? We have some ideas already, but we'd be really keen to know what participants think. I'll just pause there. Either put your hand up or type in the chat.
Jonathan, this is Olatz. I didn't click that, but I don't know. This is just some ideas. I don't know from the funding agency's perspective, if it could be nice to know more or less the budget that each of the stage activities require. I know that no one wants to put a number there because even if we say it's estimated or something like that, maybe people are taking that as a really hard number, but or a range of I don't know, a budget or something. So we know that more or less for this kind of activities, the amount of money is more or less this size. And this can be helpful for funding agencies, maybe also for some developers that are in early stages that just to project the development. I don't know, maybe this is an information, if you are gathering information from developers and also from funding agencies, maybe it is something that we can, I don't know, agree or just to have an estimated cost for
That's
stage
an interesting
activities.
idea. I think it might be quite difficult to do, but it would be very helpful, wouldn't it? Even just an order of magnitude to illustrate. And that's something that Tim Hurst mentioned a number of times, is the level of understanding the level of risk and just how significant the losses are if those risks do come to pass. I guess that would be useful knowledge to be able to quantify as an order of magnitude, just for how significant those risks are and how they increase massively as you go through the stages.
We did an exercise in the past with BMEP just to identify more or less the cost of testing almost full device in offshore environment in a test site like BMEP, but it could be accelerated or INEC or any other test site, and just to have the main activities that are needed, that nobody should underestimate the cost of some activities, because in the past they showed that they are important, and a rough number, right? General number, an order of magnitude, as you said.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks for that. That's a good suggestion. Okay. If there's no suggestions now, as I said, I'll send an email. You can respond in writing if that's helpful. I'll just tell you a bit about our plans for the next few years to develop and improve the framework, based on feedback that we had at the end of the on publication. So there we go. So we're in phase 2 of this project. We've released the framework and we want to move towards this concept of a technology passport, as we've called it sometimes. The ability of a technology to very easily move between countries because the data they have is in a clearly accessible form. It includes all of the information a funder is expecting from a receiving country, and they can show the process they've been through. And what we think we need to do in order to achieve that is increase adoption so that we can have consensus around the world and all the benefits that Tim Hurst spoke of there. We think we need to expand the framework primarily to include the evaluation area of acceptability, and that should include sustainability, environmental and social considerations. And those are things that we specifically excluded from phase 1 because we wanted to focus purely on the technological attractiveness of the technology. So that's something that's in our program over the next couple of years to develop that. And then I've mentioned a couple of times people asking questions of how do we interface with standards and certification and the IEC. So we want to make sure that we believe that integrates very well and they don't contradict each other and they don't even conflict with each other. We want to make sure that as organizations, we understand that integration and we understand how we can work together to ease the path of a technology from these early stage activities where public funding is very important to later stage activities and commercialization where private investment is also very important. So that's our plan for next. So I'll just check whether we've got any more questions coming in. One last call for questions. Anything else from the panel? Closing comments before we finish? I don't think so.
No, just thank you for your work, Jonathan. Thanks for putting this together. And as I mentioned my presentation, this is incredibly important for us as a funding agency. So can continue to do better, continue to grow, and appreciate all your efforts.
Yeah, that's kind. Thanks, Tim. And thanks for everyone, everyone in the working group.
Yeah, absolutely agreed, Tim. Yeah, we must keep this going.
Great. Okay, well, I will follow up with an email to all the attendees and all the people who registered who weren't able to join. And perhaps we can create that kind of user group and get some feedback on the next stages. But I'll leave you there. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan.
Thank you, Jonathan. Have a nice evening all. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.